Welcome back to another episode of DSC's Charity Questions. And today we're here with Neela Jane, where we're going to ask her the questions that you want to know about her new book, Grants Fundraising from the Directory of Social Change. So thank you so much for joining us today, Neela Jane. We're so glad to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to asking you the questions that people have been sending in to us. So, but before I start with some of the questions, just tell the listeners about your journey. How are you here now as the author of this book? How did you get to this point?
I don't know. I really don't know how I got here. Well, I mean, I've been fundraising in trusts and foundations and major gifts, so like major donors and trust foundations together, really, for about 15 years, which is probably going to show my age a little bit. And I working for a whole range of different organisations. Over the last few years, I've just been doing freelance bits while I've had young children. Nice. And then I just got an email one day from the publishers at the DSC just asking if I'd be interested in writing something, because there hasn't been a book on this particular topic for, I think, about 10 years it's been in print. So it was kind of time, I think, that there was going to be something new coming out in this area. And that's kind of just where it started. And it's been a bit of a crazy year and amazing experience to write it, and a real privilege, because it's a topic that in a geeky way I do get really excited about. So it's been really lovely to actually write about something that you're passionate about, and I hope that will be really helpful and approachable for anyone who is new to grants fundraising, but also an old hand that maybe wants to just refresh their ideas or kind of review their strategy in light of what's in the book. So I hope it will be really helpful for people.
Perfect. So, I mean, we can always do with reviewing strategies and things like that. So, yeah, really appreciate that. And of course, I'm sure your experience comes through in the book, which is, of course, what it's there to do. So you're talking about new fundraisers then, and let's think about this if somebody's beginning a grant funding journey, and maybe they're thinking, I'm going to pick up your book, but maybe they're also listening to this podcast, wanting some tips now. So if I'm a new fundraiser or perhaps I'm approaching a new funder, it can feel quite overwhelming. What would you suggest that I do to overcome that first hurdle?
Yeah, it definitely can feel overwhelming, particularly if you've moved to a new organisation or you're new to the area completely, and that's totally sympathetic to the overwhelm. I think probably the main thing is taking a step back from the fundraising side of things initially, and just making sure you're really clear on what your organisation's priorities are fundraising wise. Because it's not, I think it's easy to sort of jump in and be looking for funders immediately, but actually you need to know exactly what you're looking for money for. So what do you need? What projects are you fundraising for? How much do you need? When do you need it by? Kind of all those kind of obvious but core questions. You need to have all of that stuff set up way in advance of actually starting grants fundraising. I have definitely spoken to a few organisations, particularly new or small ones, who have been really keen to get involved in grants fundraising. They haven't got all that stuff sorted out yet. They haven't got maybe even a full year of accounts yet that they can kind of describe with a funder, or they don't really know exactly what they need, or they haven't got a financial plan yet.
Or a bank account sometimes.
Or exactly. So those things kind of need to be set up a bit in advance, because for two reasons. One, you don't really know what you're going to funder with, but secondly, if you then start a conversation with a funder, they're going to ask you all that stuff, like what's your need, what's your evidence of need, do you have the facts and figures and stats and all the backup stuff for that? If you don't have it, then you're not going to get anywhere with that funder for a while anyway. So probably the first thing is getting your ducks in a row, I suppose, organisationally. Make sure you've got that stuff sorted. The overwhelm thing is totally, I think, particularly a thing in grants fundraising, because often grants fundraisers aren't just grants fundraisers. Often they're maybe doing a whole range of different fundraising elements, and grants is just one of them. Or maybe you're not even a fundraiser, you're actually a program manager, and you look to find some money on the side. It's just a little part of your job. And then it's all about prioritizing your time then, because you haven't got the time to do everything that's outlined in the book, for example. You just have to pick and choose the bits that you can do with the capacity that you've got. So I think that's things like finding shortcuts to prospecting, looking for new prospective funders, things like setting up email alerts that can help you just find out when new funding streams come available rather than having to spend lots of time finding it. Things like looking at ways of ranking your prospective funders so that you're prioritising your best bets rather than just scattergun going for anything that's going. I think prioritisation probably comes into the thing about the overwhelm as well.
Definitely. And I like what you said, you start with the projects. And I think sometimes when I'm training fundraising, you ask people, what's your fundraising target? And they say, oh, 1.2 million. And you go, how many projects is that? And they go, what's a project? That's how much money
Oh,
we
right,
need.
yeah.
And
Okay.
and it is about taking that backward step, isn't it? And I talk about DSC. Well, we're a collection of projects. We deliver training, we sell books, we
Right.
deliver funds online, we
Exactly.
lobby the government, we do research. All of this, they're all different things and can all be thought about separately. Is that what you mean, Neela, when you're saying kind of?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And knowing what the priorities of the organisation are as well. Like,
Mm,
if we need to raise £100,000, say, but what is the priority there? Because the funder's going to ask that question, and they want to know why it's your priority and what's the evidence for it being your priority. So you need to have a lot of stuff lined
nice.
up. And for new organisations, there's also stuff like reputation building and getting your kind of evidence of your credibility as an organisation, because you haven't necessarily got that background history that you can kind of rely on. So that's kind of
Ah,
like the groundwork stuff that's got
yeah.
to come before you start putting proposals together.
Okay, so I like this theme. We're talking about maybe some things to do at the beginning. So maybe there's also some mistakes people make. And we asked Ray Locke, who used to be the CEO of Forces in Mind Trust. We asked him this same question on a DSC Zoom talk, and he said the biggest thing he doesn't like as a funder, as someone giving money, is grammar mistakes and
Right.
spelling and things
Yeah.
like that. And so, along those lines, are there any common mistakes or pitfalls you see when people make that initial reach?
Yeah, I mean, definitely funders all have their own pet peeves. And I think one of the chapters of the book, I kind of opened it by talking about a funder who said that he doesn't even open an envelope unless the ink has been written with a fountain pen. So he used to like lick his finger, and it's like a kind of
Oh
like
my god!
if it was just like with a biro, he would just chuck it out. They're like, I mean, obviously it's hard to get around all. You can't know everything about a funder to be that
Amazing.
specific. But people do have their own little annoying things. The stuff like grammar, typos,
Mm,
if you've copied and pasted bits of information from other documents, that can be quite obvious to someone, and it's just annoying. And you've got to bear in mind that those grant makers are probably looking through hundreds and hundreds of different applications at one time.
yeah,
Most funders are really oversubscribed. Not all of them, but most of them are. So the reality is you're competing. So any like little things that are going to just annoy someone from the off, then you definitely want to avoid those. But I think generally there's a whole thing about kind of blanket appeals and taking a scattergun approach to grant makers, where you might get like a pre-prepared proposal on a
mm,
project, and you just type in the grant maker's name in the right little slot in the document. That's probably my personal bugbear, because I think it's done a lot because people just don't have that much time, and it's kind of a time saving exercise. But it's just not a good strategy, because a funder can spot a mile off if they're just part of a blanket mailing and you've just typed the name in the gaps. So
absolutely.
really, the main thing, or kind of the main mistake to avoid, is to make sure that you're tailoring your proposal as specifically as you can to that funder. So even
I
like
like
the
that.
way, kind of language they use,
Yeah.
even, and there's ways of kind of finding that out. Ideally, getting to know them first before you put a proposal in. But even stuff like just doing your research and listening to presentations they give, or looking at their website and reports, and getting a sense of the kind of level of technicality that they talk in. What's the kind of language they talk in, and then talking in that language when you're writing your proposal.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think just tailoring it is probably the biggest thing to do. And then I think probably my second bugbear, I suppose, would be when we accidentally write too much in the perspective of our organization rather than our beneficiaries. So let's say, for example, you want to build a new scout hut
Mhm.
somewhere
Mhm.
because your old one's crumbling down and it's
Yeah.
gone rusty or something. So you might be tempted to write about that from your perspective as an organization. We really, it's rusty. We really need to rebuild this bit and this bit. It's going to cost this.
Yeah.
But actually, the fund is interested in the people that are going to be using that scout. So you've got to frame it all in terms of your beneficiaries. So
Love
yes,
this.
it's rusty, and we need to do that because of this reason, and that benefits the young people that are going to be using it for this reason. So kind of framing it in terms of your beneficiaries rather than your immediate needs as an organization.
Absolutely. Community-led fundraising, isn't it? Then almost they're kind of asking for it and we're delivering it. I love that.
Yes, yeah.
Spot on. Spot on. Anything else? Put you on the spot there. Put you on the spot.
Probably things like no. I mean, the basic things like, I mean, it's really easy to use jargon. That's another classic, isn't it? Yeah, especially in our, I think there's quite a lot of sector-specific jargon that you don't even necessarily know you're doing because it's become so ingrained, so part of your language, and definitely internally in organizations, you get your own little language going that you think other people use, but they don't. So, you know, certain words or phrases that you understand what that means because you're so used to hearing it and using it, but actually to someone external, that literally just makes no sense. So then things like proofreaders are helpful for that. Well, you know what I mean? Like everyone's,
we have a really horrible example at DSC. In the customer service team, we talk about a conference, charity accountants conference. We call it CAC very fondly.
Right.
CAC. And then, you wait till you call it CAC to a customer and see how they react.
Yeah, they feel about that. Yeah.
Are you coming to CAC?
Perfect. Exactly.
Cool.
Example.
Okay. I love that. So somebody asked about funders love to support brand new shiny projects, and that can be a really nice way to engage a funder, and kind of the core stuff, and maybe not core costs as such, but maybe just projects that are repeatable, are kind of harder to fund, and situations like no repeat funding and things like that. If you're a fundraiser in that situation, you're not getting repeat funding, or that project just isn't maybe sexy enough for the funder, what would you recommend to those fundraisers?
Yeah, I think, you're right. I mean, there definitely is a thing about new and innovative projects being particularly appealing. But I guess the question to ask is, why is that the case? You know, why would funders be particularly interested in that? And I think it probably comes down to the way we just present something. So, yes, brand new projects, they're all new and exciting. But actually, what's new? Well, what's not new, but what's exciting and potentially still innovative about something that you're already doing? Can you present that ongoing project in a similarly exciting, fresh way? Because actually, I mean, the benefit of something that's not new is that you've got a track record of why it works, and you're probably still doing that project because it's effective. So that's really strong. You know, funders want to see that as well. They don't want to just see new stuff, because new stuff comes with risk as well. So
true.
I think playing to the strengths of why an ongoing project is actually a really good bet, because you've got the evidence that it works. You know how many beneficiaries are gonna.
I like it that you said about risk. I think that's so right, isn't it? It's not a risk as such, and maybe that's part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, some funders love risk, but lots of them understandably don't. So I think it's the way you sort of frame your proposition, and I think that the whole core cost of things is quite interesting, because I think traditionally grant makers, we don't think of them as wanting to fund core costs, but I think there's been a real shift there. Even pre-COVID, actually, I think there was beginning to be a bit of a shift where funders were starting to recognise more that actually it can be quite a strategic grant making strategy to support core costs, because we think of strategic funding traditionally as being given to particular projects, but actually if you can support an organisation at the core level, the stuff that's probably not that exciting, like management costs and infrastructure and IT systems and that kind of stuff, then you're enabling them to do this amazing work that they're doing, and that's what funders want to enable. So I think there's been a bit of a shift there, and then COVID totally brought that to the fore, because suddenly we had organisations that were literally crumbling and desperately needed core costs, and the grant making community were amazing at responding to that and giving more flexible funding. So we've definitely seen a shift in the conversation there, which is really, really positive.
I like that you mentioned core costs, and I think we're starting to create a dialogue at DSC that I run a course, comprehending core costs, why core costs are not costs, because even that term implies that they're not directly attributable to service delivery, but absolutely they are. All costs are, and you're right, the world is changing slightly back round to that understanding that actually the person in finance, the building that people operate in, to have a good work environment that looks after their well-being, their productivity, that is all contributing to service delivery. Maybe we shoot ourselves in the foot as fundraisers when we try and fund projects with small, tiny costs that don't include that, and we don't actually realistically cost our projects, and maybe we beat our competitor for 2 years, maybe we close down.
Yeah, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head, that it's that full cost recovery thing, that you're not actually funding the project fully. If you're not funding the supporting costs that come around it, then actually they're only funding a portion of it. And funders, I think, are more savvy to that these days.
No,
And there's
it's
been
true.
more conversation about that. And actually, it may even be that if they don't see full cost recovery reflected in the budget, they're going to ask the question, well, hang on a minute, what, where's the rest here? Because this is not the whole project. And actually, you want to show that you have thought of that and you are aware of that and you're not being irresponsible as an organization by not looking to cover
Absolutely.
it.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so true. And we almost have a responsibility to each other as fundraisers as well, to be
Yeah,
honest, with what we're talking.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So you said there about funders getting involved with the process and making it easier for us, and we are seeing more of that as well. Grants officers, their job is to give money to individuals, to organisations, and that really helps when they get involved. They know how the process works, and so that's one example there. Maybe for the full cost recovery side of things. How else can they help us? How else would you like to see funders help us
Oh,
at least?
oh, that's a good question. And I think if you ask put that out there into the grant seeking community, you get a lot of answers. I mean, there's still a long way to get. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the power dynamic, I think, between grant makers and grant seekers.
Mm,
And I talk a bit in the book about how we sort of, as grant seekers, need to be careful about not being too apologetic
mm,
as fundraisers, and kind of, we're not window salespeople. We're not asking for handouts. We're looking for partnerships, and grant makers need grant seekers as much as grant seekers need grant makers. So we need each other just to achieve our charitable objectives. So they need us as much as we need them.
absolutely.
But the dynamic is naturally sort of weighted on one side just because they've got the money and the kind of the power that comes with that. But I think there is more of a recognition of that now in the grant making community too. So we've seen a few reports over the last few years where grant makers have been quite explicit about that and have said that they're aware that they have this weight of power and they don't
Mm,
necessarily want that. They want to see that shift and they want to enable grantees to be more open and honest about their reporting, rather than thinking like you have to say all the successes but not talk about the challenges because you don't want to get in trouble with the with the funder. And they don't want that as much as we want that equality. But there are basic things like even just the application process. Still, for some funders, it's not that straightforward. Some of them are brilliant at it, but some of them, like, you'll get like an online application form and
yeah.
it'll say a really complicated question, and you've got like 50 characters to answer that question, and it's just those things don't marry together. Or you get all the way to the end of the form, and then there's a glitch in the
Mm,
system, and it's deleted the whole thing, and it's a waste of time. Like,
yeah.
there's just so many things like that that are really frustrating for grant seekers. And funders really need to think carefully about the ease of their application process, and the fact that actually it costs a charity time and money um, to to do fundraising, to
To
have
even
someone
consider
else.
it, yeah.
So actually, yeah, they need to be considerate. And actually, it's great that the IVAR, the Institute of Voluntary Action Research, put a call out. I think it was last year, to the grant making community, saying that they wanted their systems to be more um, flexible and more open and transparent for fundraisers. And it was an amazing response to that. I think they've got over 100 grant makers have signed up to this agreement now, saying,
Wow.
yes, we will be more flexible, we will be more open and transparent, we will try and
Powerful.
make things not wasting your time, we will try and get back to you in good time. Because that's another thing, like you put an application in, you might not hear anything from that funder. And actually, you really need to know if you're getting that money. That can really affect your internal workings, particularly a smaller
Absolutely.
charity. So it's about that mutual respect, and I think we're getting there. And there's been steps like the IVAR
Nice.
community, but there's still a way to go. I think.
And part of it comes from us as well, helping funders along the journey and educating them. I mean, we have a button on Funds Online, if you've used the search tool, that says restrict unsolicited funders, and it takes out
Right,
people who don't accept unsolicited applications. But
right.
I always see that as like a challenge, and maybe
Oh yeah,
I become
totally.
solicited, and then I'm in a little secret gang of people that can apply to this funder, and it is all about relationships. You've already kind of said this today,
Oh,
building
definitely.
meaningful relationships, and it does take time. um,
Yes.
I do this before a bid is submitted. I try to anyway. Sometimes they say just submit the bid. But what could fundraisers be doing to try and communicate with their funders either before a bid or even after a bid or during?
Yeah. Well, it definitely is all about the relationship. I mean, the whole game really is about relationship building. And like, yeah, I love what you said, that taking the time, because even if you get like a call for a funding round that closes in 2 weeks or the next one's in 6 months, like wait for the 6 month one if you can, because you're just so much more likely to be successful if you've had the time to actually build a relationship with that funder in advance.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we can be so keen to just push out applications out the door, but actually it's not a great strategy, because you really need to have that relationship first, so that when they come to read your proposal, they already know who you are, they already feel excited and passionate about what you're doing, they already get you as an organisation and as a cause, and possibly even have already met senior staff and met beneficiaries, and then like how much more likely are you going to be successful if you've got that sort of shoe in already. So it's definitely all about the relationship. But that does take time.
Yeah.
And part of that is getting kind of the internal kind of backup for that, because that's a difficult thing for fundraisers when you've got someone breathing down your neck sort of from on high saying, we need to be applying to this person, this person, this person, getting this money in yesterday, and that's a lot of pressure. So kind of pushing back a bit and saying, we need to take time on this approach. It's not, grants fundraising is not a quick win by nature. It's not something you just turn around really speedily.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of an education piece, which is quite challenging sometimes.
Absolutely. So that's the beginning. We definitely have to call them up, speak to them, and ask them the questions, don't we? But what about during the relationship? Then how can we maintain that?
Well, I think we talked about prior to a grant. Yes, you're right. I mean, things like phone calls, I think there can be like a reticence to pick up the phone to a funder, but do that. For a start, not everybody is doing it, so you're probably going to be standing out if you are doing that. Things like events and project visits and anything you've got going on at your organisation, where you can just be getting them to engage more with your work. And you mentioned a bit earlier about the guys that don't like the unsolicited applications, and you're right, they're my faves, because they're like the challenge. How do you crack someone that doesn't want to be cracked? But there are ways of doing that.
Yeah.
One of the main things would be looking for connections. So who do you know that may know someone at that funder who can kind of open that door for you? So looking at your networks, looking at your connectors, looking at who can make an inroad for you. I mean, particularly with the guys that don't like the unsolicited applications, it's the peer-to-peer stuff is the key. If you can find a peer connection, someone that can open that door for you, then you're probably going to be quids in. But then the other side of it, I think, is after a grant. So we spend all this time like working to get the money in, and that feels like it's the end goal, but actually it's the stuff that comes after is probably just as important, because we spend all this time looking for new business and new prospects and new funding, but the majority of our money is going to come from our existing supporters. Absolutely. And they are so much more likely to be the ones that give, because they've given there's an affinity already there, they've given before. But it's easy to kind of slightly forget about your existing supporters and just be sending off a progress report and just doing the very basic hygiene level stuff. So I'm sending you a report that you wanted in 12 months time. Actually, we need to be thinking about how we maintain a relationship level with that. So keeping
thank yous, absolutely.
Yeah,
invites to events. Yeah,
definitely, and kind of creative ways of stewarding that relationship that other charities maybe aren't doing. That's definitely where the gold is, I think, in terms of income generation and income growth, because you're looking at your existing supporter base and how you can really nurture and grow those donors who are definitely going to be your strongest bet.
Love that. I just want to share one tip I give people on my courses, and I stole it from another fundraiser, Cara Logan, and she's done a couple of TED Talks. And one thing I suggest, if you do want to pick up the phone and speak to someone, there's one really easy question, and that's just to say, are you considering working with charities in the nature and environment space, and letting people say yes or no to that. And if they say no, you just say, well, what are you considering? And you get them to tell you what they're doing, and we fit around their needs. And that gave me a real nice safety blanket to call people. Use that. I mean, Neela, do you have any things that specifically you would say to people?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like getting someone in any kind of conversational context, but getting someone to be doing the talking is definitely the way forward. You want to be hearing from them, because those conversations are part of your research anyway. You're kind of getting
Absolutely.
a sense of that individual, that organization, who the key individuals are. You want to be hearing from them. But I think the phone thing is interesting, because you see it in all fundraising teams, I think, particularly when you're back when we used to be in offices. There's something where we feel nervous or anxious about picking up the phone to a funder, as if, I don't know, as if it's the power thing again, I think, as if you're on trial or they're going to ask you suddenly loads of questions you don't know the answer to. And actually, why does that stress us out? Like, yeah, you might not know the answer. They might ask you a question you don't know the answer to. And then you just say, I don't know, but I'll find out the answer. But for some reason, we can feel like an anxiety, I think, around that level of interpersonal connection.
Absolutely, and it's totally normal as well. You're interrupting someone. It's quite a like a private thing to do, to interrupt someone on a phone, and it's also something we have to do proactively. If we can react to these calls inbound and have that kind of stressful conversation because we're forced to, but proactively, it's tough, isn't it? Yeah,
It's tough. But then grant makers, like, they're set up to give money away, so that
perfect.
in itself is just a nice,
They exist to give us money.
thing to remember. Like, yeah, you're there. Like, that's your role is to give money away, and actually, you need to give money away to someone, and I'm a great organization for you to give that to. So let me enable your grant making activities through this totally amazing work that I need to tell you about. So actually, if you kind of think of it more as I've got something amazing to offer you, rather than I'm trying to get something from you, that sort of slightly shifts your psychology a bit, doesn't it?
We all have to do that. I think you're so right. I have something to offer you because your job is to give people like me money to run courses that change people's lives. Yeah,
Right.
love that. So you mentioned the beneficiary voice, and I think that I want to reiterate how important that is. If your beneficiaries haven't asked for this, you're going to really struggle. But have you got any keywords or phrases you use when writing applications?
Oh, I've got keywords. Well, I don't know. I think it's so much about being bespoke to the funder that I probably would answer in the opposite direction by saying,
that's good.
I really try not to be too generic, actually, and kind of just be as bespoke as possible. And, we talked a bit earlier about the funder's own language and own voice, and kind of reflecting that in the way that you talk to them, and particularly how you present a proposal. I think and that you need to get to know them to be able to do that. You need to understand them and know them, and that's all part of your research, but also part of your relationship building stuff. But there's definitely stuff that you need to avoid. When we talked a bit about jargon, there's also things like cliched phrases that are just really easy to kind of just trip off your tongue or trip off the top of your fingertips, like unique and desperate, my desperate plight, and desperate need. Those kind of phrases that are quite easy to accidentally
Giving back.
Quite they're quite sort of just probably annoying to funders that see them all the time. So it's probably kind of things to avoid, if anything. And there's certain, there's tips and tricks, kind of different ways you can write or speak where you're using the sort of more of an active voice rather than a passive voice, things like that kind of can be a bit more persuasive, particularly when you're doing writing a document. And I definitely would come back to the proofreading, having someone external or someone who doesn't know the project, certainly, to read your proposal, because there will be stuff in it that you might have read it loads of times, but your brain fills it all in, so you're just kind of going to be missing the mistakes, but they're going to be seeing it from a fresh perspective, particularly if you've been copying and pasting or rehashing information that you've read elsewhere. You want to make sure there's a real flow, and it's hard to get the gist of that on your own. You need someone
so important. Sleep on it as well. Don't finish that application on the day it's meant to be in.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, which is easier said than done, isn't it? It's not uncommon to be racing to get it off at the last minute, but factor in time for that, for someone to be reviewing it.
Cool. So what about your reputation as a fundraiser? Obviously, you've got a big reputation, growing reputation as well, which must really help you when you're fundraising. How mindful should I be about my reputation when I'm fundraising? What role does that play?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because I think technically it shouldn't really be about the individual fundraiser. You want to be raising the reputation of the cause or the project or whatever it is that you're raising funds for. So I suppose, it shouldn't really be about us as individuals. It should be about us connecting the funder to the organisation.
Love that.
But in practice, it's not quite that straightforward, because it is all about interpersonal relationships. Naturally, you are gonna forge some stronger than other interpersonal relationships with particular people at grant makers, whether it's a trustee or a gatekeeper or administrator or a grant secretary or
Yeah.
whoever.
Yeah.
So I think in practice, yeah, holding on to those relationships is helpful. I mean, I've certainly found, when you moving to a different organization, if you have got those relationships already, it's so much easier to pick up the phone and be like, hello, I now work here.
Yeah.
And like, please continue to support X charity,
Yeah.
but would you also be interested in this? And that's definitely been my experience, that happens, and you kind of can take funders with you without cutting them off from the last charity. But if you have a good relationship, that's definitely how it works in practice. But I mean, ultimately, the goal is, I think that's something that happens naturally. The goal is that you want to embed the funder into the organization. You want them to be genuinely passionate about that cause and project. So even if they do follow you in your career doing other things, you want them still to be supporting the other charities that you worked at before, and building that reputation. Yeah, definitely is on an organizational level, whether that's things like your website or speaking at conferences, or just having a platform, using social media, using a platform to kind of shout about what the organization is doing. There's loads of funders that are proactive, and they're looking, particularly the ones that don't want to receive unsolicited applications.
Yeah.
It's they're proactive. They're looking for who they want to fund. So you need to be able to be found by them if you want to get any money from them. So you need to be out there. You need to kind of get your name out as the organizationally as being the leaders, or
build familiarity with people. Yeah.
In the field. Yeah. So
same reason Coca-Cola spends so much money on advertising, just trying to get our face to see their brand over and over again. And yeah, if we do get a no from a grant giver, get them on your Twitter account, get them on your LinkedIn, whatever it is that's going to get that familiarity with either you as a person, or, as you say, your charity.
Yeah. And ultimately, you are, as whoever you're working for, like you're the face of that organization. And ideally, yes, you want that relationship, but you want them to be, oh, that's Neela Jane from UNICEF or wherever, that's
whatever it is. I love that. So talking about approaches then, have you got an unusual approach that's worked out that you can share with us? I'm intrigued where this question is going to take us.
I don't know if it's unusual, but I think we talked a bit earlier about the whole peer-to-peer connection thing. That's probably my big pushy thing, because it's difficult to do, or it seems difficult to do, and therefore I think people can be a bit hesitant to try it, or they can feel like, we don't know anyone, we're not connected to anyone, so
Absolutely.
that's not for us. We're not some big glitzy organization, or we don't, we're not part of some sort of special insider club of people that know each other, so that's not going to work for us. And that's just not true. You literally just need one person to start you off, who can make an introduction to someone else, and then get them to make an introduction to someone else, and you can end up with quite a strong peer-to-peer network.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be a big organization for that. You don't have to be well known for that. It's just about being very effortful and purposeful about getting connections. And I think
purposeful.
Probably one of my biggest grants was from a foundation that we just didn't fit the criteria for at all, and that came about because we had a peer-to-peer connection. So. And I say that with a bit of hesitancy, because I'm not saying, just go gung-ho, apply to everybody, even if you don't remotely fit the criteria, because grant makers would have a heart attack at hearing someone say that. But the reality is that they don't always give to who you think they would do based on what they say on their website or whatever. Then in my experience is that we've had some great grants in the past from funders that just on paper you wouldn't think were a fit. But if you get that connection, you've opened the door, and you may well be able to get funding that you definitely wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So the power of connection, I think, is not to be understated.
Amazing.
And it can open doors that you would never expect. So probably not unusual, but I would say underused, because there's so much potential by taking that approach. But it's a time thing again. It takes time to work out who knows who. It takes time to get someone feeling willing and engaged to make that introduction. So it's about factoring time into that.
Perfect. But it does take time, doesn't it? And it's about maybe sometimes being more proactive than reactive, building those relationships. And we've got to make ourselves have that time sometimes, don't we? It's a great tip there. So just to keep it kind of current in terms of the pandemic, has changed fundraising. We mentioned core costs, and the ability to do full cost recovery maybe became a little bit easier. Some funders became a little bit more understanding. With drastic situations like this, there's always change. And have you seen any kind of new forms of relationships or application processes start to emerge in grants fundraising?
Yeah, from the pandemic, yeah. I mean, historically, grant makers have been awesome at bolstering the sector during times of turmoil. I mean, we see that on repeat. Back in 2008-9, we had the banking crisis and a big financial recession. Um, that affects trusts and foundations in particular. Their assets will go down,
Yeah.
but historically, we see that their grant making levels go up. Either go up or kind of stay the same to kind of bolster the sector. So, and that's happened again with the pandemic. Amazingly, that we've seen grant makers really sort of stepping to the fore and kind of filling the gaps amazingly. So that they've been awesome at doing that.
They have.
And there's great relationship opportunities within that where you can kind of go to a fund and be like, this is the situation. We are so overstretched. We have got demand for our services gone sky high.
Yeah.
Funding sources have gone way low. Can you help us? And I think funders have been much more flexible as a result of the pandemic, kind of recognizing those challenges for charities, particularly if they're existing grantees, but also the new ones as well, being more flexible. Things like supporting more core costs, diverting funds that might have been restricted to a particular project and then allowing them to kind of be diverted to something else. So that's all kind of part of this more flexible, transparent relationship, which is a really positive shift. So I think out of a dire situation, there has been some really positive stuff in terms of relations, I think, between fundraising charities and grant making charities. Yeah, so
Lovely.
definitely it's been challenging all round, but they are, as a community, they are generally pretty awesome, because that's something that happens all the time when we look back at the kind of ups and downs of the economy. They're pretty great at buoying the sector.
They're so close to the need that I guess it's natural, isn't it?
And I think they feel that responsibility. I mean, as you said before, their role is to give. Their role is to support the sector.
Absolutely.
And a lot of particularly larger foundations are really involved and passionate about what's happening in the sector. It's a genuine care there. So, I think we've seen that reflected in the way that they've behaved and come together and communicated more with grant seekers.
Thank you so much, Neela Jane, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. So this is part of the build up for a new book we're releasing at the Directory of Social Change that Neela Jane has authored for us. Do you just want to quickly just give us a little bit more of an insight into that book, what people can expect, and actually
sure.
After that, let us know where people can find you as well. That would be great, Neela Jane.
Yeah. Well, the book is it was a bit of a whistle stop tour, I suppose, really, of the whole process of grant seeking. So it takes you through I call it the approach cycle of the book. So there's a chapter on each sort of stage in this cycle, from finding funders to begin with, researching funders, how you do that in practice, and then how you build those relationships we've been talking about today. There's a whole chapter on the proposal development stage and kind of the nitty-gritty details of that. The whole chapter actually on submitting the proposal, because we think about just sending it off in the post, but actually there's a lot more around that you can do to make it a strategic approach. There's a lot about kind of being strategic. Then there's a whole chapter about banking and stewardship and grant management as well. So it kind of takes you through the whole sort of cycle with a funder. And then at the end, there's a chapter right at the end. As I was writing the book, I started thinking I really wanted more input from the grant seeking community about what they wanted to have in it. So I put out a call on social media for people just to fill out a basic survey. What do you want to see in the book? What questions would you like to be answered? And I got loads of feedback, which was amazing. So the last chapter of the book are kind of almost like frequently asked questions, kind of challenges and things that come up a lot, time and time again. To kind of try and address those. So hopefully, my aim was to answer all of those questions somewhere within the book. So I hope that we've done that successfully. But yeah, it's kind of a whole holistic approach to grants funding. So not just looking at the proposal stage. So I think historically, we've probably put too much focus on just the proposal, which is a really important part of grants fundraising. but actually this book, this is a much wider picture of the whole relationship.
Love that. And this is it. This is a new book from us, and obviously we're just trying to keep up to date at the Directory of Social Change as well, and that's why we bring authors like you onto this. So if anybody's listening and they want to follow you, you mentioned Twitter there. Is that a good place?
It's probably I would like to be a bit more of a modern person. I am on Twitter. I'm not very good at using it, but I'm on stuff like LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And kind of all the kind of trust fundraising network things. Like, you know, there's a hub, a Facebook, Just Raising Hub. I'm on there.
Cool.
There's the special interest group from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising.
Yeah.
I'm on there. So, you know, things like that. Yeah, but LinkedIn's definitely a good place to connect. And then, yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions or signpost to resources if that's helpful.
So on LinkedIn, it's Neela Jane Stansfield is her name.
Right,
and,
yes.
And on DSC, it's the Grant Fundraising book. You can find it, and it's coming out in May. So when you're listening to this, it'll be out in the next month. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and for giving us the questions that we took to Neela Jane in the first place. And a massive thank you, Neela Jane, to giving us your time as well, to give us your insight into grant fundraising and just give people this other special insight into you as well as a fundraiser. So I really appreciate you coming here today and answering our charity questions.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching Charity Questions by the Directory of Social Change. So this is the podcast where we bring charity experts to you and we ask them the questions that you provide us via social media. So if you want to get involved, please check out the Directory of Social Change on Instagram, Twitter or LinkedIn. And of course, to hear more about this content and to learn more about Charity Questions, subscribe to our YouTube channel now, and of course, like this video to let us know if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.